A test of endurance that will take your breath away.
50 Ironman in 50 states in 50 days.
A local record-breaking swimmer is changing the way you think.
Darlene Santor has seen it all.
The first person ever to trek across Antarctica alone and without any help.
We set New Year's resolutions and goals, and everybody writes out this list of what they want. And very few people take the time to write out the list of what it's going to take and what they're willing to sacrifice.
We are the stories that we tell ourselves. We get to choose. Don't let somebody else write that story for you.
What's your marathon today? Is it getting out of bed? Is it not having that drink today?
The extraordinary becomes possible when you make it impossible to remain ordinary.
You control the environment within your mind on how you're going to keep getting up and going after this. Control the controllables, which is your mindset right there for right now.
Everybody gets so overwhelmed with the enormity of something, and all they have to do is like, what's the one thing I can control? I have the option to quit, or I have the option to be perfect for 1 second. And if you continue to choose the option to be perfect for 1 second, you cannot lose in life. It's how you win at the highest level.
I would say, a pretty deep fan and student of the forging power of intentional suffering. And so I hope that you don't mind. It's probably old hat for you, and I'm sure a lot of people like to geek out on it with you, but I hope you don't mind if we kind of dive deep into some of that psychology and emotion and spirituality, and
For sure.
Really make this a conversation just about what this show's all about. I mean, unlocking human potential, and sometimes going to really extreme lengths to do that, because if it were easy, everybody would do it. And if life already unlocked everybody's potential, then everybody would already be living their best life. And we know they're not. So
I think it's hard to kind of find what those limits of human potential is. And I think that's what I've ultimately learned on this journey is it's an ever moving bar. And as you know, I like to frame it in terms of like, look, when you're in the middle of a big challenge, when you're seeking your potential, it seems impossible. Like when you're in the middle of it, you're fighting, you're trying to move forward, you're trying to move through it, you're trying to get to the top of that mountaintop in that moment. And it's always interesting when you get to the top of that mountain, all of a sudden, bam, this bigger mountain that wasn't in view before because it was blocked by the current mountain comes into view. And that mountain is bigger, it's more treacherous, but it's exciting because you didn't believe it was there before, but because you've made a decision in your life to continue to press forward and overcome that moment when it seemed impossible, all of a sudden a new mountain comes into view. And now our perception changes, and we have an opportunity, if we so choose to go climb and conquer that mountain. And at the top of every mountain is another mountain that we couldn't see before. And so I think if we can use mountains as the line for potential, those mountains there's always another mountain behind that mountain. And we're never ready for the next challenge and can't see that mountain until we're standing on the top of the current mountain or the current challenge that we're going through. So discovering human potential is interesting, slippery, dangerous road sometimes, but for sure interesting, because I do believe now, after everything that we've experienced over the past 10, 15 years, that it's a moving mark, and it's truly the perception and perspective that we have as mountain climbers to what we decide is ultimately our limits. I believe it's a choice.
I mean, it takes time to do anything well, much less to do 6 things really well.
Yeah.
At what point, like, was there a point where you realized, okay, if I'm going to do this at an elite level, I'm going to have to commit, let's say, X amount of time to it? That's probably not, it's going to require some fundamental changes to my life.
Yeah. It's interesting. I like to draw the analogy of like New Year's, and we set New Year's resolutions and goals, and everybody knows what they want, man. And they want, the bigger house. They want more meaningful relationship. They want vacation time. They want more money, the bigger house, the cars, all these things, right? And everybody writes out this list of what they want. And very few people take the time to write out the list of what it's going to take and what they're willing to sacrifice in order to get there. And so there was, on any journey, there's going to be different moments that require different levels of sacrifice. And over time, we've gotten better at communicating, understanding what those short-term sacrifices are going to be, understanding that like this isn't a forever sacrifice and this is what needs to be done in order to accomplish that goal. And because it's been a family journey, those conversations were had with myself, my wife, my kids, as a family, as a unit. How's this going to impact everybody here? How's this going? What sacrifices does everybody need to make? Who's going to take a more front role on the team and who's going to be more passive role? And what does that all look like? And so, and we started this journey when our kids were super little. And I really believe that.
And sorry if I interrupt, but how long ago was that? How many years has it been, this journey?
So the first world record that we did, so my first full Ironman was in 2008. The first full marathon was 2004. First world record was 2010. I tell people all the time, look, the only way to guarantee your failure is to stop showing up.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people that you will beat, not because you beat them, but because they simply took themselves out of the game.
Yeah.
And you beat them. And I've had a lot of opportunities. We got to do a race called the world's toughest race in Fiji. And I'm talking, this was like map and compass, 10 days of like survival and jungle and ocean kayak, all the stuff. And the host Fijian team was given a spot. And it's a 10 episode series on Amazon Prime. It's kind of fun. But the Fijian team was dead last, and they were given a spot in the race. They had terrible equipment, no coaches, no training camps, and all these teams from around the world came in like heavily qualified and well coached and well trained. And the Fijian team ultimately came in last, but not really, because half of the teams quit and took themselves out of the race because it was too hard. And so ultimately that Fijian team, one, they were gritty out of necessity. And two, they understood time versus movement, and they just kept chipping away at the task until it got done. Like they were like, well, we'll just keep moving. We're at a, we're going at a slow pace, but we're just going to keep chipping away. And they beat every single team that took themselves out of the race.
So I'm trying to imagine you finishing that first triathlon full length. And I mean, if you finish an Ironman, you're like one of the toughest people around. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And everybody else is like, I'm so tough. I finished this Ironman. And in your mind, clearly there was some level of, okay, I have not arrived yet. My work is not done. And there's got to be more than this. Take me back to that moment when was that when like the seed was planted that like, maybe there's a whole other level I can take this?
Yeah, it was interesting. Cause when I did I, just like everybody else that gets into the sport, the biggest race is the World Championships, and this is the only year, and it was because of the pandemic, that it wasn't in Kona, Hawaii, and it was in St. George, and I had a lot of athletes that did it and loved it and had an amazing experience. And when I did my first, because I saw the World Championships when I was first racing, and I got super excited. I'm like, I just want to do one of these. And that was it. Like that was my goal. And again, that's where I believe the potential was. Like, I was like, oh, I can do one. And then
that was the mountain, so to speak.
Yeah, that was the mountain.
Yeah.
And when I did that first one, it's such a steep learning curve in the sport, and you're always trying to better. And I did that first one, and I was like, that sucked. And it was amazing. And I know I can do better. And then you go back to the drawing board and figure out, okay, how do I overcome this? And how do I improve here? And then you keep showing up every single day. And so, when I first started doing it, after my first one, I was like, okay, I want to do one more of that. And how do I get better at that? And then as I started to progress through that, I just fell in love with the sport, and I loved challenges. And we just kind of broke our first world record accidentally. And I was just like, look, I want to help other people. I want to make a difference. And we just started raising money for charity through racing. And at the time we called it the Try and Give a Dam Project, because we were raising money to build dams in Africa. And about halfway through that journey, I was like, man, I wonder how many someone's done in a year, official races. And I looked it up, and we were on pace to break that record. And I was like, holy cow, this is fun. And that's kind of what put us on that journey. And then when you finish that first record, you're like, man, I don't want to be the half Ironman world record holder. What's the full world record? And then we really started to hone in on human potential and the next challenge for us. And for us, it was always the next natural step in the progression of what we were doing, because we were the only person or group that had that perspective on what we were doing. And so that's really what did it. After my first one, I didn't jump right into the bigger challenges. I was like, okay, how do I get better at doing this? And I think that's a huge mistake that people make, is they either see someone else or get inspiration from something and they go, I'm going to do 100 Ironmans. And the problem is you can't go from 0 to 100. You can't see someone else's headline and go, that's my potential. And it could be your potential, but you have to take and respect the process, the journey, and the steps that it takes to get to that moment. Right. And so when I first started, I didn't know how to swim. I didn't have a bike. Like, my potential or pursuit of potential was a sprint triathlon. Like, I was learning how to swim. I have a picture of my very first race where I'm gripping to the edge of the pool. I'm gasping for air. I've got a nose plug on. I'm contemplating drowning, jumping out of the pool. And nobody would have looked at that guy right there in that moment and said, yeah, right there, he's going to break multiple Guinness World Records. He's going to go on and set endurance sports history. But that's the truth, is everybody's journey starts somewhere. And I think people are scared to start. And that's an important message.
Whatever it is, whatever your preparation sequence is, like, can you take us through the art and science of how to get ready for something you know is going to be literally so hard it could kill you?
Yeah. And I think I'm going to kind of shock, or not shock, but like, it'll be interesting, my response to this. So we'll back up a little bit. Leading up to the 50 in 2015, I was catapulting from each of those experiences, mountaintop, see the next mountain, and got right to the bottom of that one to try to get up it. And that was building the foundation, building upon building upon building until I could do the next one. And you're continuing.
Can I interrupt with a question?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but when you say the foundation, how much are you talking about physical stamina, VO2 max, growing new capillaries, et cetera, versus a different type of psychological foundation in the mind?
Both at a very high level.
Yeah.
The only way to gain mental toughness, number one question I get, how do I become more mentally tough? The only way to gain mental toughness is through action, activity. You gain that knowledge by doing. You're not going to listen to you and I chatting, be more mentally tough. Right. You're not going to read a book, become more mentally tough. You have to take those principles and then apply them in your life through action. And then it's just like a muscle, right? I'm not going to read Muscle Magazine and bam, have massive arms and a stout chest, right? It's okay. I'm going to take what I just read and learned. I'm going to look at those images. I'm going to get inspired, motivated, and I'm going to do something in the gym. Same with mental toughness. You've got to apply a knowledge. It's a muscle. And if you don't continue to exercise it atrophies as well.
Okay.
So 2015 finishes, and I said, nothing's next, man. Like, I'm satisfied. I've reached physical, mental limits, but we also made mistakes during the 50 and wanted to find out, ultimately how to become better and stronger every single day. Well, after the 50, our lives changed, and it shot us into this world of speaking and a book and the documentary and all these. Like, I didn't grow up saying,
how old were you when you finished the 50?
39.
So is that an age where it would be considered that, hey, you might have hit your prime and we're not expecting any more from you from here?
Yeah, for sure. I think endurance men's prime is 35 to 40 or 30 to 40, kind of in that range. You can hit your peak. It's not a young man's game. It's not an old man's game. It's kind of like takes a long time to get fast over a long distance. And endurance comes over time by building those foundations and that, like we've been talking about. So what was interesting is my life changed. You got thrown into this world. I didn't grow up be like, I want to be a motivational speaker. I want to be a thought leader. I want to be all these things. It was furthest from my mind. Actually, I'm more of an introvert than anything else. And after the 50, I was like, I'm satisfied. I'm good. Never going to do that again. But because of the mistakes that we made during the 50, I was like, you know what? I wish I could redo the 50. but I never wanted to redo the 50 because it was so chaotic. It was so filled with logistical problems. There was just so many things that prevented me from finding out how many consecutive Ironmans can I do.
In the logistics is a lot of that because of the whole state by state thing.
Yeah, the United States is massive, and so you've got to do an Ironman during the day that takes 12 to 17 hours, and then you got to figure out how to get to the next state, set up, do it again, rinse, repeat. There's so many unknowns, chaos, confusion, mechanicals.
So it's interesting. You kind of commingled physical limits with like a bunch of logistics and stuff that I get your point. It's like, you got to wonder, well, what could I have done if the only challenges were physical?
Correct. Physical and mental. And so I said, okay, for the next 5 or 6 years, I didn't get complacent, but my focus and attention was on helping others achieve their version of hard. I believed I'd reached that potential of what I wanted to do. Back of my mind, want to redo the 50, never want to redo the 50. And then the pandemic hits. As a speaker, as a coach, as an athlete, my calendar gets wiped clean. And I said, here's an opportunity. If I can remove chaos, if I can remove logistics, if I can put team and systems in place, could I now go double what everybody thought was impossible, truly chase my physical, mental potential? And I call it, could I defy logic? And just here's what's crazy is, you just talked about preparation and all this stuff. Well, I had stopped preparing for 5 years because I was never going to do this again. And when the opportunity presented itself, the pandemic hits, and you can look at it as, I've been dealt a rock card, or this could be an opportunity. What am I going to do with it? And for me, it was like, this is an opportunity. I can reset my history. I can do better than I did before, and I can possibly chase new limits. And so I did a 4-month training camp, and I promise you 4 months is not enough to get ready for 100 consecutive Ironmans. And for me, I was relying on my career, my past experience, my mental toughness. And ultimately, the documentary for the 100 is going to be unbelievable. It's going to release later this year. But what we endured, a lot of it was because of lack of preparation, physically. But I had enough knowledge and experience mentally to navigate some of that pain and conditions that we had to get through it successfully. I believe in life, like, you can accomplish a lot of things. It's how you want to feel and navigate that experience is ultimately based on your preparation. And so somebody could go out and do an Ironman and not do a lot of preparation. Your level of suffering is going to be much more elevated than if you prepare properly, and that actual race day becomes more of a victory lap than anything else. Because you've done the work. And so it was a unique experience on the 100 because I wasn't spring vaulting from the previous moment of seeking potential, but I was rather like removed for 5 years, 5+ years, and then go, here's an opportunity. I'm going to make the best of it. I don't know how big this window is, and I've got to figure it out along the way. And do I wish I would have been more physically prepared? Absolutely. Would the story have been as compelling, and would have I learned as much, and would I have an opportunity to teach what I learned in that quarter of a year because I was physically underprepared? Absolutely. And in fact, it's a super long story because, there's a lot that goes into it, but ultimately it was one of the greatest blessings of the campaign that I was so injured and broken that I had to walk a lot of the marathons, but that allowed people from around the world to come join me. And every single day without fail, people would say, I'm so grateful you're walking because I wouldn't have been able to join you otherwise. And that is really the whole purpose of why we do what we do, is to give people the sense of community and inclusion and an experience. And if we were performing at a high level like I wanted to, and like we did in previous years, that opportunity wouldn't have presented itself. And I don't believe the 100 would have had the meaning that it did. If I was completely removed, very out of shape, and in a unhealthy, obese position, it doesn't matter how strong I am mentally, there's going to be a breaking point physically where it doesn't matter how strong I am mentally. And the exact opposite is also true. If I was extremely fit, but didn't have any mental experience to be able to break through some of those difficult moments, it also doesn't work. And so here's the conclusion that I've ultimately come to, because it is a big question I get, like, are these challenges more physical or are they more mental? And you know, a lot of people are going to say, oh, it's definitely way more mental. And that is true, but you can't tap into that mental side if you're physically unable to endure and physically in a position to perform that physicality. And so I believe there's a point where you need to be 100% physical, 100% mental. And at some point in time, the mental is going to pop up a little bit to help drag this physical specimen through what he's doing. And to me, I firmly believe that we have a very strong spiritual background and connection to a higher being. And I believe that even if you're 100% physical, 100% mental, it means nothing without the umbrella of spirituality. And so this has been a journey of physical, mental, and spiritual.
Yeah.
And then we could also throw an emotional in there too. And I believe emotional, spiritual are somewhat connected. And so it's interesting. You need to be 100% physical, 100% mental underneath an umbrella of spirituality.
So I'm wondering if you could take us into a singular moment within the 50, within the 101, either way, some moment. Let's use the 101 unless you feel like the other is better for illustrated purposes. But I'd like to find a moment when the question enters your mind, can I physically do this? Because I know you had like an issue with your shins and like there were other physical things you were contending with.
Yeah.
And that moment of doubt creeps in, and it's that mental toughness / spiritual grounding that pushes you through it. Like, can you take us inside that moment and maybe even almost have us relive your thought track? I think that would be really powerful to hear.
A couple key moments, like on day 59, we'd broken our own world record. We reset our past. We'd executed to perfection. We did every moment outside in all the elements, and we changed public perception. And then on day 59, tragedy struck, and I was in a catastrophic accident on my bike. I was knocked unconscious, and then we found out I broke my back in that accident and ended up doing 41 consecutive more Ironmans with a broken back. And you know, we often wonder why do we keep showing up? Why, you know, and I tell my kids all the time, like, we never know when somebody's watching, and we need to set the best example we can at all times. And I have countless stories of people on day 80, 90, 95, even 100. A good example is a lady showed up. She'd never heard about our journey, our story, was invited by a friend to come run a few miles with us on day 100. And almost a year later, well, maybe about 6 months, I got an email from this random girl. And she said, "You don't know me, but you saved my life." And she was going down a destructive path. And she showed up on day 100 and ran a few miles with us and ultimately saw our suffering and that we continued to show up. And she took all those lessons that she learned in that moment and applied them to her life, did a course correct, changed her life. And I often think, and this is why I continue to show up with our team and do the things we do, because I often think, had I quit early on, I would have never had the moment or the opportunity to impact her life. And I think that's so valuable in all of our lives as we navigate this journey. Like, if you quit today because it's hard, you're missing a beautiful opportunity to impact somebody else's life, because someone's always watching, whether it's your kids, whether it's your parents, whether it's an associate, whether it's a complete stranger. And my whole purpose in life is to give people hope and to help them on their journey. And so I can't stop showing up, because who am I now going to miss an opportunity to impact and shift their mindset and the way that they're navigating their journey? And if I can give somebody hope by me showing up, I'm going to continue to do that.
And so I'm wondering if you could go in those moments. It's a two-part question. One is, what is the immediate provocation in the moment to keep yourself from stopping? Like, was there a mantra? Was there a conviction? Was there an aphorism? And then secondly, whatever that impetus was that you came back to again and again and again to just simply not stop. At its deepest level, was it about you or was it about them? Meaning the people that you were doing something for?
Yeah, I think both, but at a high level, it's for my kids, because I believe that we set expectations for our children, and then we live and set the example for them to watch and experience and see. The first part of that question was, say it again.
Sort of that momentary thing that you keep coming back to just not stop.
Yeah. So here's what's interesting. I think it's important to stop, not quit, but to pause, because in those moments they're moments to cry, to reflect, to internalize, to analyze, and feel. And I think we live in a society where, especially as men, it's not okay to stop and feel and cry and process, that we just need to keep pushing, showing up, grinding, all these things, like this huge macho approach to things. And I think that's destructive. And through all of our journeys and trials, myself and members of my team, none of us ever stopped with the intent of quitting or needed to be talked in to keep going. It was, I need a moment to process, feel, cry, release, and then we'll keep going. And we respected that within the team. And I think that's super important to pause often, to reflect, and to shift or course correct. And when we would have those moments of pause, it wouldn't be long. We'd have quick turnarounds and we'd get back to task. And whenever we would have those moments of pause to feel, to reflect, we'd have a mantra to keep going or to restart. And it was 3 simple words. And we actually have a shirt on our website, ironcowboy.com, and the shirt says, "Here we go." And as soon as we said the words, "Here we go," it was a complete mind and body reset. And then we were good and we could go again. But those moments of pause are super important, because without pausing, we're shoving emotions and experiences down to one day where we explode, which will force us to stop, because we're incapable of moving forward, because we're in complete disarray. And so those moments of pause are so important for us to be able to continue long-term on the journey.
That's a really interesting kind of paradigm. I think a lot of us think about building, whether it's literal or figurative, building the muscle to endure, building the muscle to keep going. But how many of us ever really think about building the muscle of systematically restarting?
Yeah. Because I think that's probably the most important thing, because people need to understand at a very high level that we're not perfect and that we're going to make mistakes along the way. And the problem is we buy into this belief that we have to be perfect. And then when we make one mistake, we spiral and turn into a complete dumpster fire, and we don't restart. And as soon as we come to the knowledge that we're not perfect, we're going to make mistakes, we course correct and get back on task, that's how you win. And that's a process that you should go through continually in order to keep moving forward. Without that pause or that course correction, I believe it'll be your ultimate demise and is a fast track to failure.
And how liberating is it to know that you have trained your ability to restart so well that if you need to stop, you can stop, and you won't stay stopped when it's time to start again, because you've trained for that too.
Yeah. And I think that's the most important thing. One of my favorite concepts that I like to talk about is catastrophizing. And catastrophizing is looking at an event in the future that hasn't happened yet. It's typically the worst case scenario. And then we give it all of our power and attention. And if we don't use those opportunities to pause and stop, we start to put all of our focus and attention on those futuristic, impossible moments that we can't control. And then once that moment happens, or we bring it to fruition or reality, we're forced to stop, and now the journey ends. And so I believe those moments of pause, self-reflection, and the ability to get going prevents us from catastrophizing a mythical event in the future. Because when you're doing something hard and you're in the moment, you need all of that energy in order to keep going, and that energy motivation to restart. Well, if we're so focused on a mythical worst case scenario in the future, that restart process becomes very difficult. And so you have to figure out what your triggers are, put a good team around you, communicate through those moments, process, and then figure out a good trigger to get going again. And ours was just simple 3 words: here we go. And as soon as we or anybody on the team said, here we go, boom, no hesitation, reaction, get back up, keep going. It's time.
Was there ever, and I have an agenda behind this question. I'll just claim that, right? Disclose that right up front. Was there ever a perfect mile or even a perfect 100 yards or even a perfect moment when you're like, okay, right now we're doing everything right?
It was interesting, and this takes you all the way back to the 50 on day 30. When I had kind of a complete meltdown, one of those moments where I had to stop, and it was one of those moments where I was learning how to restart. And I literally got off my bike in the middle of that 112 mile bike ride on day 30, found a small patch of grass, and I just started to cry. I broke down, and I was just feeling and processing. And it was a moment where I was like, is this worth it? Like, what are we doing? Can I manage this level of pain? Can I continue with this level of physicality? Is everybody right? That this isn't possible. And then I just, reached into my memory bank to when we lost everything in the economy and we used to own a mortgage company. And my wife and I just kind of banded together and said, you know what, we can be perfect for just one moment at a time. And we can build on that success, that momentum, and we can rebuild our future one moment at a time. And so I was laying there in that patch of grass, and I looked over at my bike and I was like, you know what? I know how to turn the pedals over in a perfect revolution one time. And that's all I have to do. I just have to get back on my bike and turn the pedals over one time. I got to be perfect for 1 second. And I believe that anybody in their darkest hour, their darkest moment, can be perfect for 1 second. And that's how you regain and start back getting momentum. Success breeds success, confidence breeds confidence. And in those moments of impossibility, I would focus on being perfect for 1 second until I could put together 60 seconds. And I'm like, holy shit, I was perfect for 1 minute. And then all of a sudden you're perfect for an hour, and you're perfect for a section. And then all of a sudden you had a perfect day. And you're like, oh man, I love that. And now I'm gaining momentum and I can be perfect. And if you look at our history and what happened during the 50, after that moment on day 30, those last 20 Ironmans of the 50 were my fastest. If you took the average time from those last 20, they were my fastest. And my 50th day was my fastest of all 50. And it was because I learned how to have those fast turnarounds. I learned how to stop and restart, but I learned how to be perfect for 1 second and stack those on top of each other. And that's ultimately what leads to our success, because everybody gets so overwhelmed with the enormity of something. And all they have to do is like, what's the one thing I can control? What's the one thing I can do right now that's going to move the needle and get me closer to where I am? I have the option to quit, or I have the option to be perfect for 1 second. And if you continue to choose the option to be perfect for 1 second, you cannot lose in life. It's how you win at the highest level.
Tell me about Darlene and where she came from and how she, became Coach Dar.
I came from The Sopranos.
All right.
Meaning I grew up in the East Coast, and my whole family are a bunch of Italians from the East Coast. And, we were the family on Sundays. We go to church, watch football. Everyone comes over. And from 12 until 10 p.m., it is family and friends and community over our house. And that is a huge part of where I am today, because ironically, sports is a big part of my world, but I never set up I'm going to work in sports to help people be great. What I did is, as a young girl, my father had me in sports all the time. Part of it is because he had my sister, and then he was going to have a boy, and I came out a month early and was a girl, and he's like, what the hell? So I did all the things that he probably would have done if he had a son. So sports is a huge part of it. But this is interesting. When I was younger, we would break down film as a little kid, and he would have me, whether it was watching a game or was something I did. And he used to say, Dar, it's the practice that you do that leads to the great things that are the outcome. And you're going after perfect practice. No one's ever going to be perfect, but it's the practice that's important. And I used to think, this guy's a tyrant. I would be out there for 2 hours and finish practice, and it would be 2 more hours, never knowing all of these lessons would lead to where I am today, coaching pro athletes. But I did that for years, obviously, as a kid. That's just how I grew up. And then my grandfather had a stroke, and I was 16 years old. And I remember seeing an occupational therapist walk in, and she was working on his cognition and his vision. And I said, what is it that you do? And it just, ironically, it's what fascinated me. It's what I went to school for. But here's the irony, Jeff, is that my grandpa has a stroke. I go to school to be an occupational therapist, specialized in neuro, work in a neuro unit. My first job out of college is neuro, stroke, brain injury on a stroke unit. I'm 25 now, working on the stroke unit, and I married my college sweetheart then, and we're about to start a family. I buy the book, What to Expect When You're Expecting. I'm thinking, this is great. I'm doing great in life. This is the American dream I'm building. And I go to a chiropractor to adjust my neck because I had hurt my back. And I leave the chiropractic's office after being adjusted. And then I go to work a couple of days later, and all of a sudden the floor flips upside down, and the floor is the ceiling, the ceiling's the floor, and I cannot see at work. And I'm thinking, what the heck is going on? And so I make my way down the stairwell only by feeling, because I cannot see it all. And I go home thinking I have a sinus infection. I do not think I have anything severe going on. Long story short of this is I end up having a stroke. And when I went to the chiropractor, they manipulated my neck and they ripped the artery to my brain. So when you ask, how did I get here today? I just think that's an important part of the story, because at 25, I was told I could die any day because it was too late by the time they found it. And they said, the good news, bad news is you had a stroke and you have a blood clot left in your brain. And if it dislodges, you could die any day. Good news is we think scar tissue is going to develop around this, but it's going to take some time. So everything you do, you have to be careful, because if this dislodges, you'll die. So I'm 25 going, no, this is what my patients deal with. This is who I treat. This is not what I need. I'm going to go through. And it ended up affecting definitely a part of my life. Affects, I can't have kids, end up getting a divorce, go through all of that. But in that, I had this thing where I lost fear, Jeff. And I said, well, if I could die any day, I want to go fix the world. So I wanted to go fix healthcare. That was like my first stint. And I go back to school at night, and I end up becoming president of a healthcare company at 28 years old. And I was running businesses after that. And then in 2008, I started my own practice, because by this point, I had realized human potential, unlocking human potential. Everything that I did to help people with their mental faculties impaired. When I was running business, I was thinking, you don't have impaired mental faculties by an accident, but it's your mindset that's impaired. And if we could shift that, we could help unlock the business. So in 2008, when the world was crashing, I said, I'm going to go start my own practice, because everyone just needs to shift how they're thinking. And everyone thought I was crazy then. Literally, they were like, you're literally running companies. You're living the American dream, and you're going to go start a practice with no clients, no business. I said, yeah, in a recession. And that's what I did. I started literally teaching about how to unlock your potential, pretty much your mindset. And I did that through, built that over the years, which has led me to this practice now where I coach athletes and CEOs on the greats being greats, how to keep performing to continue to be great. And there's patterns to greatness. And so I just teach people how to create patterns that work for them based on their gifts and talents.
I mean, you work with athletes and executives, but in general, do you feel like there is resistance to people letting go of good things to make room for great things?
Definitely, because it's also having the discernment of which to let go. And if I let go of this, is it really the one that I should let go to help me get to that next level? And well, it's good. It's not that it's bad. I mean, it's good, but it's like, well, it's good, but is it going to serve you for where you want to go? So you could look at it as the people around you. I mean, just even taking your circle of people around you. Yeah, some of them are good, but are they truly great where you want to go that are pushing you? And an example I just gave the other day, I'm in this space all the time. And one of my closest friends that I work out with, he's a retired hockey player. He's got way more endurance than me, but we work out a lot. And the other day he said to me, are you going to be a polar bear or grizzly bear? Meaning, are you getting up to do the workout tomorrow? And I had a tight schedule. And I'm like, well, now that he said it, I'm going to be a grizzly. I'll be there. Like, I was not going to not be there. Mm-hmm. But having him, which means I only have so much time to spend with a certain circle of people just because of time. that there's other people that are not, they're not my day to day. And someone like him is, because we push each other. He pushes me to a whole nother level. It's just his endurance. So my point is, it's not that people are bad. It's just, where are you going and what version of you want to be requires you to have the right circumstances around you to push you, which requires you to let go of certain things so that you could go higher. The people, the places, the thoughts, by the way, the habits and routines that you have, because even some good things are still a distraction, which doesn't let you take the proper action.
Let's start with relationships, if we could.
Yeah.
I actually think that's probably the biggest thing that most people settle for. And I don't just mean one like intimate like a romantic one. I just mean all the relationships in our life, right? How do you typically like talk people through or walk people or coach people through, let's say, a process of almost trying to like quantify, because this sounds kind of mercenary when I say it, but it's like quantifying the value of relationships in our life relative to our goals, and then having some sort of a process that aligns with our values and the way we want to be in the world, that probably has hopefully some degree of kindness, where we don't just like nuke relationships. But how do you coach people through like a substitution, like, okay, we're going to sub this one out and pull this one in, or maybe move this one out a few rings, move this one in. Like, do you have a methodology for helping people re-engineer their relationship landscape in their life?
Well, I relate everything to sports. So I say you have a starting team, you have bench players, or you're off the team, and it's not personal, but we're trying to win a championship in life. And it's each person's different. So depending on what you want to win at it, like and when I mean win, it's not at the sacrifice of a human. It just means what you feel truly called to go do in this world, the version you want to be now in the next 20 years from now. You, Jeff, who you want to be, would say, okay, that version of you, what does it look like? Tell me exactly. What are the values that align with this? What is the character of this? What's the culture and ethos of you, the team? And then what starting players need to be around you that are going to help you with this, and you help them with that. Because oftentimes when we put ourselves around the best of the best, we're in value alignment. We align, so we're helping each other's mission collectively. And that's where the ethos, the kindness, the paying it forward comes into practice here. So this is not a narcissistic move. There is collaboration here. But you look at that and say, okay, is my starting team, this roster, are we all supporting each other to win because we all believe in where we're going on this? Great, let's keep this. And then there's some bench players, people that you know, that you have relationship with, that you don't always see all the time, but they're coming into this alignment, and you keep contact with them and you connect with them. And then other people that are completely out of alignment, it's not about being mean, but we only have limited time to spend and refuel with. So if I'm going to refuel with someone, it's definitely not someone that doesn't take their life serious, that doesn't take their health serious, that doesn't want to be excellent. I'll love you and I'll say hi to you and we'll connect, but it's not my inner circle where I'm refueling. You're not going to be on the starting team. So you kind of break this down: starting team, bench players, and then spectators.
Yeah, I love the team analogy. And it's like, you don't just like draft the first 12 people that show up for the tryout.
No.
It's okay to like cut people. Like, you're not going to build a winning team if you don't if you just take the first 12 people that show up. I'm using obviously basketball, but I mean, it's like, well, you know, my college roommate, like, he was there first. So, and maybe he is that star player on your team, or maybe he's the guy that is like, you know, got no arm in left field, but he's just on your team because he was there. And so
this really applies, by the way. I mean, people should apply this to intimate relationships, like someone you're going to partner with too, because just because you met someone and they looked cute last night doesn't mean they get on the starting roster. That does not mean, I mean, that is one of the greatest alignments you're going to spend energy around all the time. It should be a starting player. You should have, and that needs to be where you're drafting, you're scouting for this and you're drafting for this. And as funny as this sounds, I talk about this openly with my friends, and I said, I might make this sport contract where they're like signed up for 5 years. But in seriousness, we should be looking at this of, is there value alignment on this scouting card? Like, how does this actually work for us rather than just, oh, well, we connected and yeah, we went on a couple dates. Sure, we could hang out. Hold up. Is this person going to help you? And are you going to help them propel your future forward? Or is this going to be a handicap? Is this going to pull you back? And we really have to, there's so many relationships that are having hardships, and for good reason, because we have to pick better. We have to align better. We have to have value alignment. And often it's not treated with that seriousness.
And in the work I do, I would say the two greatest limiters of human potential are people's mindsets about money and their spouse.
Yes, 1,000%.
And so I'm curious, how do you work with someone? Because I also believe in the same, despite my divorces, I genuinely tried. I believe in the sanctity of marriage.
Yes.
I'm not just like, oh, cut, you're out.
No. Right.
So how do you work with someone when you start to feel like their spouse is really, really dragging them, holding them back and not open?
So this is where I say control the controllables, because, I'm not advocating for people to go and get divorced, but I'm saying, if you're in this and you're in a partnership here, then you're going to have to understand that this person is probably not going to support you on some of these ideas, but you have to stay connected to where you have to keep growing. And what happens is eventually they sometimes change over time because they're like, wow, this is rubbing off on me. And I've seen couples go through that where the person, they might go to a seminar, they might go to something and they're like, I had an awakening and I realized like things I needed to shift. So don't underestimate the power of you keep going forward to be your best version, what that could do to someone else. And the other thing is, should it not, you have done everything to make yourself the best, to add value to that relationship. So if it doesn't make it, it will not be for the lack of not trying. And you have to stay true to wanting to continue to grow yourself, because it's hard, but this is control your controllables. You control the environment within your mind, between your two ears, on how you're going to keep getting up and going after this. And it's like going into battle. You have to keep that general, that person in battle. You have to keep them motivated to stay in battle, to stay in this if they're going to be in it. And so how do you do that? Control the controllables, which is your mindset right there for right now. And no, they're not coming along right now, but they may someday. And if they don't, I still have to go forward.
Might be a good bridge into you getting to share a little bit about your book, which I see you have a copy of on the shelf behind you. And I know that it is called The Art of Bouncing Back. It seems, I'm guessing that it connects to this idea. So bouncing back, find your flow to thrive at work and in life anytime you're off your game, knowing that at any given moment, the vast majority of people probably feel off their game in some regard. Let the audience know how that can be amazing and how they can use it as a springboard.
Well, here's the thing. We're not promised an easy life. We're not promised our days are going to go perfect. They never are. We have some good days, we have some good runs, we have some good years, but inevitably we run up against some tough days, some tough months, some tough years. And we're not necessarily taught mental resiliency. And so from working in neuro, my background's in neuroscience, human potential, over the years, I've been helping people use and adjust their mindset to build grit and resiliency in order to propel forward. And so when I wrote this book, what I didn't share is that first stroke has led me to 3 strokes. And my third one was literally about 4 years ago when I was trying to write. The original book was about awakening greatness. And that book will come, but my literary agent came along and she's like, how you bounce back from this and you keep getting back up is a story in itself, but you help everyone bounce back. And by the way, my third stroke, Jeff, I was so much better on how to handle it than I was at 25 because I learned how to do the things that I do now. And so this book is built with the principles that I use with my clients, I use with professional athletes, I use with CEOs. And when you learn these skills to build this resiliency and grit and a foundation of who you are, what happens is when you hit your next challenge, tough year, tough moment, your valley is not so low now because it's like you've built muscle. So you're now bouncing back at a higher level. It's not so low. So you don't go down to the deepest valley anymore. You shoot down, but you're going to come back up faster because you have the skill set that has risen you already. So when you hit that moment, you're already higher up in life. You're higher up in mentality. So you know how to handle it. By my third stroke, because I'd gone through that adversity, I knew it was coming. I was staggering again. My speech was starting to slur. So I Ubered to the hospital. And I said to the Uber driver, he's like, "Oh, I hope your friend's okay." I said, "Oh, I'll let her know." And I jokingly walked in with a note from a doctor, like, "I'm having a stroke." And they're like, "You're smiling. This doesn't make sense." I go, "I have a nervous smile. Don't take me off that." I said, "But this is my third. Like, I've gone through this rodeo. You know, my biggest thing is I pray I don't die on this table right now. But if it happens, it happens." I just was, it's like putting yourself in the cold plunge. When you get in enough, you realize, I don't like this, but I know it's not going to hurt me, or I know what to expect, and you get stronger. It's the same with when you go through adversity. The more you go through, the tougher you get mentally. That's what the book does, is it helps you get more mentally resilient and gritty to handle every day.
So you've had 3 strokes across how many years then total?
Probably over 20 years.
Okay. So, and it's just like, so you've got like, I think of it as like living next to a volcano. You've got a dormant volcano in your brain that can erupt kind of whenever, and you don't know what's going to happen, probably going to set it off. It's happened 3 times in 20 years. Mm-hmm. I assume it could happen again.
Definitely. Yeah.
What?
It get worse.
What's the best part of that reality?
Knowing that I have to live in surrender. Two things. Knowing I have to live in surrender. There's nothing I can do about this, but keep myself as healthy as possible. So if it happens, I could bounce back, hopefully. And also knowing that, just like everyone knows this, but I really want to make my runway count. It's why I'm so passionate about what I do. Like, I really have a sense of urgency. It's why I wrote the book too. And the agent and the publisher, McGraw-Hill, they were like, "You've got to get this out in case you do ever lose your ability to speak, or we need to get this out there." And so I live with such a sense of urgency, which is a blessing and a challenge, because I want everything to happen so much faster, but I have to live in a surrender. So I am in this constant state of, what can I do today that's going to move the ball down the field? And then once I do it, I have to okay, now I have to wait and see what happens from the fruit, the seeds that I planted. So I live in that.
Based on the current state of medicine, is it inoperable or not, at least not advised?
Yeah. And I just, out of all these years, I happened to just get an MRI a month ago that no radiologist has ever found out why these kept happening. And I just found out I have a genetic defect in my brain that literally a structure of my brain juts out right where my vertebral artery is. So if I was to jump out of a plane, go bungee jump, do anything that jars my head, it's going to neck my artery right there and I could die. So I have a genetic defect that literally I can't fix it. And if it hits it, I'm gone.
I was born with a genetic disorder called Waardenburg syndrome. And I share that. And so, it shows, like, when I was younger, especially, I looked like kids used to say I was like, the R word. Mm-hmm. And so I say that a little bit just as like a, connection moment. But I've had a lot that I've had to come to grips with. And I ask myself questions like this of what I'm about to ask you.
Okay.
If you could go back and do it without it, would you?
No, because I wouldn't be here today talking to you. I wouldn't have written the book. I wouldn't know what it's like to struggle at the level that I've struggled. I wouldn't know how to overcome. I would not literally be the person I am today without the adversity. And so it's been a gift. Like everything, it's a gift and a challenge, but I'm going to utilize it as the gift because it's what's allowed me to have this platform to speak.
If they could change.
We connect through vulnerability. We really do. We connect through our comment. If I came on and just told you all my accolades and that I've never went through any problems, you'd be like, well, this person's not in real life. They don't really have any challenges and I have challenges. It would be hard to relate and have me as your coach.
Would you change it now if you could, or do you like how it forces you to be?
I think there's a part that, if I'm being totally honest, like I worry that if the next stroke comes, because each one's gotten worse, and I just think, I just don't want to be the person that has the stroke where I'm incapacitated. I can't talk. I'm drooling. I'm paralyzed. I'm bed bound. I don't want that for my life. And so I hope that's not where, I took care of patients like that. So I don't want it to, I just pray that that's not the next part of my story, so I don't want that. But again, if I'm living in surrender, whatever it's going to be is going to teach a lesson. There's a lesson that comes from everything. So I have to learn to say, if something happens, there's a lesson that's going to be taught from that. That won't be for me, because we didn't come here for ourselves, by the way. Like, we legitimately weren't born to just serve ourselves. We were born to use a gift to share with the world. That's how we advance humanity forward. We didn't come selfishly just to collect. We came to serve.
Who are you? How'd you get here? What happened? Yeah, like let's hear your hero's journey, whatever it turns out to be.
Okay. I'm a native of Portland, Oregon. I was one of the only lucky kids in the 60s. And I say that because I was the only kid I knew whose parents really just were crazy about each other. And so for me, that was the modeling and the kind of template that defined really what I was after in life. My dad made a lot of money. He was very successful. Both my parents were mountaineers. But the thing that was the great adventure to me was finding somebody to really fall in love with, and then making that happen and getting to pass off this kind of cascade of love to children of my own. I met this cute little Kansas farm girl and decided to put myself in exile for love. And so I moved down to Kansas, which was like moving onto the face of the moon for me. No forests, no rivers, no trees, no hills, definitely no mountains, just wheat fields and nice people. But lived there for 30 years, had a good ride. I taught public school for 20 years, and the hurts and miseries of those folks really kind of called me to becoming a therapist. So I put myself through school, became a therapist, did both for several years. About 13 years, I did both. Went and taught in the morning, then did therapy at night, building my private practice. And then did therapy for another 10, 15 years. And then that cute little Kansas farm girl died. She was the healthiest person I'd ever known. And we planned for what she was going to do when I died. But we never considered that she'd die and I'd be left. And when she did, it was really what started my spiral into hell. It's the ironic thing.
So how old were you when that happened?
I was 50 years old. Yeah. So you thought by then I would be mature enough to be able to handle that kind of torment, but not
before I even hear the story, what I'll say is, I think that's very interesting that, like, you're defining, let's call it your hero's journey. That narrative for you, if it started at 50, I think there's a bias in society that, like, your greatness the seeds of your greatness have to all start being planted when you're very young. And certainly at 50, it's far too late to have some transformational life pivot and so forth. So I'm actually grateful for the audience. Like, I'm inspired by the idea that you have this whole other chapter that started at 50. That's great.
Yeah.
Let's hear about it.
A chapter I certainly wouldn't have chosen. The ironic thing is I was considered a grief expert in the Midwest. And once I experienced it myself, I realized, man, anything I'd ever known was just simple book knowledge. And I even called some of my old clients and apologized, and thankfully they were gracious. But I told them, man, I just had no idea. Yeah. And a year later, as many times it goes, the torment and the anguish of that, because she died 15 days before our 30th anniversary. And we'd had a really good marriage. Even though I was stuck in Kansas, I was happy to be. just to get to live with her and enjoy this rich friendship and great love life. And when I lost her, it was so awful that a year later I got leukemia and lymphoma, and it just kept ravaging my body. I've always been an athlete. After soccer, I started doing a lot of triathlons and loving endurance events. And I just let go of everything. And I went from very fit 212 down to 152 pounds in the next 3 years. By 2013, I'd moved back to Oregon because Kansas without the cute little Kansas farm girl was Kansas. And so thinking that I could come back, be with my family, kind of restore and recover. And that's not what happened at all. Actually, I gave up the one last thing that I had anchored to my identity, and that was my professional life. And so all of a sudden, I'm renting for the first time, lost my wife, had $500,000 in out-of-pocket medical bills. And so I had to sell my home, cash in IRAs. All of a sudden, I'm pretty much broke and renting at 50 when I'd worked so hard to build this wonderful life. And I was just kind of done by August of 2013. But then I remembered, hey, I got a 21-year-old daughter that I adore. If I let this leukemia take me, that's pretty darn selfish because she just lost her mama. And so I've got to find a way to survive. And that's where my therapy practice really came in handy. And so initially they gave me 4 to 6 weeks.
Wow.
And my daughter, was just freaking out. She thought she'd be an orphan at 21, that everybody'd be gone. So I just knew I had to do something to live.
So you're 50 years old, 50-ish. I guess where do we go from there?
Well, thankfully, I'd had a pretty thriving private practice and helped many people bring their lives back using Viktor Frankl's work, Man's Search for Meaning. And it was interesting.
Well, actually, may I ask, were you a formal logotherapy practitioner, or you just incorporated that?
I just incorporated it. I wasn't certified as a logotherapy. I'm impressed that you even know logotherapy. A lot of people don't. So kudos to you. Yeah. And I just love his biography and how he didn't choose to go to Auschwitz, and he was dying, and he had always wanted to study what helped people overcome. But it wasn't ethical to stress people to that point. But then he realized, I didn't choose this, but I can use this.
Mm-hmm.
And I was down to 152 pounds. The biggest thing on me were my swollen lymph nodes under my jawline, and then what my oncologist lovingly called my hockey puck. It was the size and shape of a hockey puck under my right arm. Then I had 60 or 70 others. It was like gravel all over my body.
Wow.
And when I'd look at myself, I didn't recognize myself. You could see every rib. You can see my pelvic bones. I literally looked like those pictures of people coming out of Auschwitz. And that was the first time.
Only you have these lumps all over you.
Yeah.
Do you I'm curious, do you have a picture? Not that you necessarily need to show it here, but I mean, do you keep a picture of that as kind of a reminder?
The funny thing is, everybody on Instagram is doing these before and after pictures of cancer. It never occurred to me to take one. I mean, I didn't even want to look at myself, much less take a picture. And quite honestly, Jeff, I've thought about it a lot lately because I've been asked that question a lot. I didn't think I was going to live.
Yeah.
I didn't think there was going to be an after. So why take a before if there is no after?
Yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah. And I do have one picture, and this is so funny. I'll send it to you. The first day of my swim. This is June 3rd after swimming, forcing myself to swim for a year and get in shape for this endurance event that I challenged myself to. Well, and I thought I was so ripped. And man, I look stick thin. It's ugly.
So yeah, I obviously have read the story of the swim. I haven't read the book, but I've read much about the story. But yeah, I mean, help the audience understand when we say the swim, we're not just talking about, hey, somebody's going to go swim some laps.
Yeah. No, I knew I had to have a purpose that I was passionate about. And so I started praying and asking very prayerfully, because I don't know if you know it. You probably do. Heck, you knew about logotherapy. But the brain by its very nature has to answer every question you ask. Well, people have had the experience of thinking of a trivial question. What was that person's name? Or where did I leave my keys? And then all of a sudden it comes to mind while you're brushing your teeth. What a lot of people don't understand is that happens with every question you ask. And you can ask the deepest questions of your life and get that same wonderful response from your unconscious. And so I was using that at a very deep level several times a day, hoping that I'd get this wonderful, very complete answer. Well, a month later, it's still crickets. And so I'm starting to get really discouraged. And I look around, and I'd been living in this little duplex and hadn't even put my bed together. I was laying on the floor. I was so depressed. I was laying on a mattress on the floor, which just isn't me. And I thought, well, while I wait for God and the universe to answer me, maybe I should unpack these boxes and put my bed up and, kind of act like an adult. And so one of the first boxes I opened was a box of childhood things my mom wanted to get out of her house. And one of them was a journal I'd been forced to keep in 6th grade. And so I'd forgotten I'd kept that, or been forced to keep it, because what 6th grade boy keeps a journal, right? And so I opened it, and it says, when I get old, I gotta climb Mount Everest, swim the English Channel. And every time it still happens, just a shot of electricity went through me, and I started getting excited. I thought, okay, because my parents had been mountaineers. Dad's climbed every mountain on the West Coast. I've climbed most of them by the time I was 15. And I thought, okay, I know my numbers are so bad and my blood counts are so poor, I couldn't handle elevation, but I could swim the channel. I don't know why I thought that, but I started getting really excited about it. So immediately I Googled active cancer patient swim in the English Channel. There was no one. So I thought that's what I was going to do. And as life went on, and as I started to swim and just getting in the pool and kicking off the edge, was the first time in 3 years, I felt like myself again. But as time went on and the numbers all went in the right direction, which really surprised my oncologist, he's like, you're going to kill yourself. Your immune system's so poor, a public pool will kill you. I said, Doc, what do you want me to do? Die sitting on a couch watching Wheel of Fortune? I'm not going out that way. I got to do something. So I kept going. And finally, right around Christmas, I was starting to finally gain weight and my head was starting to clear. And I got out of the pool and it hit me. Who cares if another middle-aged man puts on a Speedo and swims to France? It does the world no good. And in my case, it's not going to be a pretty picture. So what could I do that would serve the world more? And that was a really important question. And within days, I remembered a 30-year-old dream that I'd had of swimming the longest river in my home state of Oregon, the Willamette. And it's 187 miles long. And when I remembered that, I quickly Googled to see if anybody had yet done it. No one had. And I just knew that's what I had to do. And it made me so excited because it was so much more organic. I had come back to this place I love. I was born only 4 blocks from the Willamette River. And it would just be this beautiful time of, hopefully, my only intent was hoping that I would inspire other cancer patients to refuse to give up simply because they've been diagnosed with something. And if I swim 187 miles, they might see me as an active cancer patient and think, okay, if that schlub can do that, maybe I can keep doing my own recovery at least. So that was my original intention.
So 187 miles, that seems, I don't know the exact measurements of the English Channel, but I've heard stories of people swimming it. I mean, that sounds comparable, I'd say. You tell me.
The English Channel is 22 miles.
Oh, it's only 22 miles across?
It's about 9 times. And you can do it in about 12 hours. So.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So
it's 9 times farther.
So you upped the ante considerably.
Considerably. Plus, the English Channel, other than getting hit by, a freight liner or something, there aren't really many huge concerns. And with me, I went through a set of rapids the first day. There are all sorts of switchbacks. Oregon has huge 100-foot tall fir trees, and those fall in the river and create what's called strainers. And if you go under and get stuck in one of those, you're a goner. Plus, if you get stuck up against a boulder or a rock or a tree, only 1 mile an hour current creates 2,000 pounds of pressure. You're probably not getting off that baby. So I think there's a reason nobody had done it before. You're kind of risking your life, even though to me it didn't seem like it at the time.
Can you go into the mindset at that time, and if you agree with me, the freedom that comes from being at such a low point?
Yeah, it was a freedom I resisted for years, and that's what made me so sick.
So you got sick at 50. How old were you when you swam the river?
54.
So 4 years.
For 3.5 years, it was just one thing after another. I woke up in the hospital twice where the doctor was looking at me scared and said, well, we called your family. We didn't think you were going to make it. And so I just had one thing after another, like you said, suffering, I tell everybody, it's really good to be on this side of that story. And a lot of my clients will say, Dean, I just want to grow as fast as I possibly can. And I say, no, you don't. I say, yeah, I really do. What could I do that would fast track this? Kind of hit the fast forward button. I said, suffering. That's what I always say. And I said, you don't want to do that. It's not fun.
You know what they call unregulated growth in the body?
What's that?
Cancer.
Yeah.
You don't want to grow as fast as you can.
No, that's a great point. Yeah. And so my mindset was two things. One, I wanted to do something before I died that mattered, I felt. Two, how many people I thought, even if I don't succeed, how many people attempt to do something no one in history has ever accomplished before? That's pretty rarefied air. And even if I died, I felt like I'd leave my daughter a legacy of courage and hope because she saw me never give up. And so my love for my daughter was really what fueled the power and the passion to get through this. Little did I know, it scared the hell out of her. She thought I was trying to commit suicide or something, which was not even on my radar at all. I thought I was inspiring her. But the greatest mindset was, I tell myself every day, the extraordinary becomes possible when you make it impossible to remain ordinary. So there were many, many days, Jeff, where I didn't want to get my butt out of the house, out of bed, because my doctor said the type of leukemia that I had is mono on crack. It just makes everything hard, even just getting out of bed, exhausting. And so to then push yourself to get in the pool, and I started with 11 laps, and then every day I'd try to add one more. And pretty soon I'm doing 108 laps, which is about 3 miles a day. And it was absolutely exhausting because I also had lymphoma. Well, the lymph system only works when you move. And by moving it and having so many just filled with toxins, I knew that within an hour or two, I'd have severe flu-like symptoms because it was putting so many toxins back into my body. But that was part of the healing, and I had chosen that. And so I was ready to handle it. And every day I thought, what would be the normal, ordinary thing? Well, the normal, ordinary thing would be to just lay in bed and feel sorry for myself. The normal, ordinary thing would be to be mad about everything that happened. The normal, ordinary thing would be to binge Netflix all day. And so I would make that literally impossible for me to do. My dad is my hero. I just adore him. And so I'd call him every night and I'd say, hey, this is how many laps I'm going to do tomorrow. And this is the time I'm going to do it. And he's like, good, call me when you're done. And he actually sounds like that. And just knowing this man that I respect so much knew, and that I kind of promised it, almost made it impossible for me not to do it in my mind. And then secondly, I was living in this little duplex. It had a garage, but you had to walk out of the duplex to the garage and then go into the garage. There was no indoor access. So what I found I had to do, the only way I could watch Netflix, I didn't have a TV at that point. I just had my laptop. I'd take my laptop out at night, put it in the passenger seat of the car, pack my swim bag, put it on top of my laptop. And so when I woke up in the morning, when I was tempted to just stay in bed and binge on Netflix, in order to do that, I had to get up, get out of my house, go into my garage, lift my swim bag, take the laptop, and walk back in, the walk of shame. By the time I'm lifting up my swim bag, I'm like, what the hell am I doing? This is stupid.
Right.
I'm just going swimming. And so I would just put up little roadblocks like that, or big ones, every day to make sure I couldn't continue to do the ordinary thing.
How long was the training regimen?
I started in August of 2013 and I got in the Willamette June. So almost a year, 10 months.
Wow. Okay.
And I always felt like I could withstand pain better than anybody. And I just would crawl deep inside my mind with willpower. And I found myself doing that because there's nothing harder when you're sick to kick off the wall and then come back to it and say, okay, 107 laps to go, 206 laps to go. You're like, oh my God. And I found myself soldiering through these swims. And all of a sudden, one time I'm halfway into the swim, grinding away. And I'm like, wait a minute. I'm not in a hospital. I'm still alive. I'm doing this thing. Why don't I just relax and try to have fun and enjoy this thing? And it brought me to the present moment. And that's something I still do. It's how I start every day. Again, using the power of questions plus this idea of fun. I start every day by looking through my schedule and say, how can I do that and have more fun? And many times I come up with great ideas. Even if I don't, it puts me in a real playful mood and pulls me to the present moment, and makes life so much more enjoyable. So every day I'm counting the laps still, but I'm not grinding through. I'm just being grateful, watching the bubbles, thinking, I could be in an oncology ward and I'm out here and I know I'm going to get sick in an hour or so, but I'm doing this thing and I'm getting stronger every day. So I think the commitment and consistency is the foundation, but you put on top of that a nice frosting of fun, and it almost makes it a superpower. And for me, it went just a step beyond. The reward wasn't at the end, it was the doing.
Yeah.
And being there doing it. And it had never been that before for me. It had always been the medal at the end of the race, or just knowing that you'd gotten to the top of the mountain. But all of a sudden, I broke through. No, the reward is really just being alive, and it not being perfect, and you being scared, but finding the courage to do it and enjoy it.
Yeah.
And that's really what carried me through that 187 miles. That burst I had in the pool has really stayed with me ever since. Anyway, so stepped into the Willamette on June 3rd. It was, a lot of people don't know, the Willamette is largely a snowmelt river. And depending on how much snow we've had here in Oregon, the winter before, it depends. It either creates, a river in the 50s or in the 40s. That year, we'd had a lot of snow. And so when I stepped in, it was 42 degrees. And that sounds warm to some people. Only the people that have never gotten in 42-degree water.
That's not warm.
No, it was almost bone-shatteringly cold.
Yeah, that's like when people do
10 to 12 hours a day.
Yeah, when people do cold therapy, they're typically doing it in water that's high 30s, low 40s.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so even with the 3 mil wetsuit, I would go into thrombosis, or what they call deep core throttle hypothermia, where I can feel my internal organs banging against my ribs. And I start to get fuzzy headed, and I'd have to get out and do jumping jacks or run in place for about 5-10 minutes just to warm my body up to get back in and do it again. And I was going into that hypothermia probably 5 to 8 times a day. And I thought that was the biggest challenge. But one of the things that just is a pet peeve of mine is I watch these documentaries about these extreme endurance athletes or these adventurers, and the whole time they're crying and whining. Oh, I hurt. Oh, I'm tired. And I'm like, you chose it. Nobody forced you to do this. And so I promised myself, with the help of the Almighty, I am not going to complain one time. And that was my big goal, to go through this and never complain. And so that kind of kept my mouth shut and kept me from feeling sorry for myself, knowing that I'd chosen this, but being constantly cold and tired and doing 10 to 12 miles a day for 22 days, I thought that was the hardest challenge. Lo and behold, first blood test I took after I was done, I went down to one of the world's...
But before you say that, how many days did it take to swim the river?
It took me 22 days.
Okay.
I took 2 Sundays off. One, just people are like, well, did you take Sunday off because you're really religious? No, that wasn't it as much as one of the things I do with every one of my routines is I try to embed purposeful imperfection, because I'm such a perfectionist that if I don't prove that I can do this thing and still be imperfect, then I get in my head. And so even when I do these world record swims, I'll take a day off or do something to prove to myself in the world, I can create a world's first and still be imperfect. I don't have to be perfect to do this. And so I took the day off. Thankfully, it also helped my body to rest. The second time I took a Sunday off, my doctor asked me to take 2 days off instead of 1 because I was down to less than 3% body fat, which I thought was a problem. Lo and behold, I didn't know anything about brown fat, but when you get down that low, it starts to pull all the stores of brown fat, which super fuel and boost your immune system. So they think that was another reason that the first blood test I took after the 22-day journey, my leukemia was mysteriously gone without chemo or radiation.
So, wow. And
yeah, it was a big wow for me.
and gratitude. Real quick, I want to let you know about my text message community. So I use text messages to provide unique value to my podcast listeners. These texts can just be random thoughts. It can be letting you be the first to know about an event I'm planning or some free training that I'm planning to host for the community. Just shoot me a text to get subscribed to the list. The number is 702-996-3926. Again, that number is 702-996-3926. Now let's get back to the podcast. What the hell, man? How does a person cross that threshold? Because I mean, I know how success in anything goes. It's cumulative, it's iterative. It's not like you just woke up one day and did all these things. You stack it. But nonetheless, you take it so much further than most people. Like, what's really going on under the hood here?
You know, a lot of people assume that I came from a really great family, had a great mom, had a great dad, had a great education. My parents helped me buy my first home, and that wasn't the case. My father had cancer, kidney disease, and tuberculosis. I found out when he was 7 years old. My mother was extremely mentally ill, in and out of mental hospitals. She heard auditory responses, like things like telling her to kill all of her kids and herself. And so that was my childhood. In fact, my dad, because of the pain medications that he was on, would wake me up at night, just spaced out on pain medicine with a gun to my head or a knife to my throat, telling me, I don't think you should live. Life isn't worth living. Life isn't fair. One night he beat me so bad. One day he beat me so bad that I didn't even hear it, but the cops break in the door and they remove me from my home, put me in a facility. I became a ward of the state of California, and I was placed in the Masonic Home for Children to be raised. And right away, the caregivers there started grooming me for sexual abuse, which I endured for 4 long years until I ran away from that place. So, you know, that was my start in life.
I mean, right out of the gate, I assume that you're correlating that to your ability to endure and to persevere and to ultimately become quit-proof.
You know, it was part of the process. So because I was being molested and I was so confused, after I was removed and made a ward of the state after my father died, I still kept in touch with my mentally ill mother. And when I ran away from the children's home when I was 17, I ran to my mom's house, and it wasn't soon after that I found out once again she wasn't the answer to my problems. So Jeff, I did what I feel is one of the greatest things that somebody can do to become quit-proof, is I checked myself into the mental institution to get professional help. And when I checked myself into the mental institution, during the process, I was put in there for a 5150 hold. And during the process of me being in there, I found out something really transformative. I found out I wasn't crazy at all. I found out I just had problems, you know, and that problems have solutions. And right then and there, I started changing this victim mentality to a victor. That was sort of where the transition started happening. So when I checked myself out of the mental hospital, my older half-brother suggested that I go join the military. So the only branch of the military that would take somebody without a high school education and with a troubled background was the United States Marine Corps. So I ran down, I joined the Marine Corps. I was happy to, you know, have a crucible to take my new Victor energy to and give it a test run. And it was interesting because when I got to the Marine Corps, we get off the bus and we're standing on the yellow footprints on attention, and I look around and everyone's terrified. And I look at the guy next to me, happen to be like twice my size, and I'm like, "Why are you shaking?" And he just looked back at me, just terrified. And right then and there, where everyone else was completely terrified, I was right at home. I had already been institutionalized. In the children's home, we had a chow hall, we had an infirmary. I slept with other people. And I had already woken up in the middle of the night to people that were way meaner than any drill instructor. So for me, Marine Corps was like, yeah, I got a great place to train and get stronger mentally and physically. And all my clothes matched, and where everybody else is freaking out, I was like, this is a great place,
Really extreme hardship teaches you to seek out that for which you can be grateful and that which you can build on.
Yeah. And so like in the mental hospital, I sledgehammered down that wall. I turned that adversity into opportunity. In the Marine Corps, where everybody else saw adversity, I saw opportunity. Again, sledgehammering down that wall and turning that adversity over and looking for the opportunity in it. And that quit proof, that's what we teach people how to do, is to sledgehammer down the wall of adversity and turn it over and find the opportunity in the adversity and go down that road and not lay down and quit. So why do people quit? They run into walls and hurdles and obstacles and things that they feel that they can't break through. You sledgehammer down the wall, you take that adversity and you figure out how to turn it into an opportunity, and you go down that road and you don't quit.
What is it that allows you to keep going in these types of pursuits? Like what's really going on? Help humanize it for us, so to speak, if you would.
In quit proof, we have 5 points of a star. Your North Star, your why. That's what keeps you going. When I ran the 121 marathons in a row, I was stopping at foster facilities along my route to share my story. And when I started, it was the 4th of July. I was the Grand Marshal for the 4th of July parade here in Huntington Beach, along with Arnold Schwarzenegger. I started July 4th. When I ran across the Mojave Desert, it was July.
Yeah.
Okay. When I got to the Rocky Mountains, it was August. So my toenails were falling off. Blisters all over the place. I was so sore I could barely walk. But I micro goaled it. So I broke that major goal of getting to New York down to micro goals. All I had to do was make it to the next children's home. Because when I shared my story with these children, I watched them change in front of my eyes. So I'm just like everybody else. Everybody has what I have inside of them. I just had my North Star. In fact, one of the children's homes I stopped at, I partnered on that run with a syndicated radio talk show host. Her name was Dr. Laura Schlesinger.
Sure.
And she had bags called My Stuff bags. And the reason I got attracted to what she was doing was when I was ripped away from my home and I was placed in a holding facility, all I had was a clothes on my back. Well, her My Stuff bag gave kids something they could call their home, their own, right? They got a bag of stuff that was their very own. And I knew from personal experience how scary it was to be removed from my home, placed in a facility with the clothes on my back, have nothing else. So I was partnering with her. I handed out 10,000 of these My Stuff duffel bags. And one of the homes that I stopped at, so all I wanted from the kids when I handed out these bags was either a thank you or a high five or both. That's it. That's all I wanted. So I got them and I hand this little girl a bag and she starts walking away. I said, excuse me, need a thank you or a high five. And she just squeaks out a little thank you. And within moments, I start seeing the staff tear up and a couple of them start to cry. I'm like, what's going on? And they come in, they whisper, they're like, she hasn't spoke a word since she got here 6 months ago. And you did that. I was like, bam. Okay. I don't care if I have to run on glass in 115-degree heat. This is worth it. My life is worth it. I have a purpose in life. My North Star is in place, my anchor, so that and that's what we teach people in Quit Proof is like, when your North Star is in place, it has to be what you really, 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 and if I didn't say really, really want, hey man, your North Star's got to be in place. You've got to have courage. You got to step up. You got to have courage. You have to take action. That's another point. I ran. I put one foot in front of the other, push, roll. Because people are like, hey, how do you do that? I'm like, well, this is going to be very anticlimactic, but it breaks down to this. You put one foot in front of the other and push real hard until you get there. And no matter what, you don't give up, give in, tap out, and quit. You find a way. That's it.
Find something to do that ties in with your life story. And so for you, these children homes weren't just a good cause. They were an environment that you had such a deep connection to that it probably meant more to you than anything in the world to help transform that environment for other children. Is that true?
It's more than true. And to act as a living example that, hey, I've got these titles. I got these world titles. You know what I mean? I was afforded a 6th grade education. I was removed from my home just like you were. You know, I grew up in a place just like where you are, and look what I'm able to do. I challenge you to do more than me, you know, because I spoke their language. I came from their tribe. And to your point, there's statistics that say if you go around and tell everybody what you're going to do, you're this much, I think it's 40% more likely to do it. And then when I do motivational speaking too, I say, always talk to yourself empowering and kind, because who do you listen to the most in life? You.
Right.
Right? So say it out loud. Tell other people, you know, hold yourself accountable. You know, it's like Mike Tyson says, you know, everybody's got a plan until they start getting punched in the face, you know, and what happens when you set a goal? It seems like the universe starts punching you in the face and start trying to knock you off track, you know? And so what we've done is we've created this toolbox of tools that we gift to people to help them navigate the jungle of quitting, you know, which is vast. And we have a great toolbox at Quit Proof to help people, you know, get through this jungle, not give up, give in, tap out, and quit somewhere along the way. And so the goal of all I knew as I had to do was get to the next children's home. That's it. That was my goal. All I have to do is get to the next one, get the next one, get the next one. And then next thing you know, I'm 120 marathons. I'm in New York City. I'm at Nike Town and I'm speaking at Nike Town, and I get all worked up and I'm like, I'm not done. I want to run the New York Marathon tomorrow, because the New York Marathon was tomorrow. And I ran the New York Marathon the next day. You know, and when I paddleboarded from Oregon to Mexico, then that was in 2007, because I wanted to do something for the environment. I felt the unacceptable amount of plastic in the water was unacceptable, and what it was doing to marine life and humans and all was unacceptable. So I wanted to bring awareness to it. I met the guy that discovered this trash patch out in the Pacific when it was obscure. Now everybody knows about it. So 2007, I paddled from Oregon to Mexico to bring awareness to it. In 2010, Jeff, I paddled from Key West to New York, and I broke that record. Again, except this time with a 6th grade education, I came up with an environmental youth education program that is now taught in schools. Right? So I'm like, so what's your excuse? You know what I mean?
Right.
So what I do is I just keep going, because I'm supposed to be the guy at the ready teller behind your loved ones to do horrible things to them and feel great about it, and have you read about me in the newspaper the next day and feel sorry for all of us, you know? So I really taken that and turned it on its ear. So what we teach is where people find adversity, we flip that over. And where's the opportunity? What am I supposed to learn? How am I supposed to grow? Why is this happening to me to make me a better person? You know, those type things.
I have to imagine that when you're engaging in these endurance feats, you know, again, metaphorically, it's like getting punched in the face nonstop for 121 days. Like, it hurts and you want it to stop, and you're having to control the conversation in your mind. Have you figured out the secret to that?
I have. You have to create a sentinel in your mind that alerts you right away when you're starting to think about quitting. Think about it like as you're standing on a sidewalk while 60 to 80,000 cars are rushing down the street. Those are your thoughts every day. And then your sentinel goes, there's a red car. There's a red car over there. That's you wanting to quit, right? So your sentinel, you have to learn to think about your thinking, right? Mm-hmm. You and your thoughts are two separate things. So you have to learn to think about you have to create a sentinel that tells you right away, hey man, you're starting to go down a slippery slope here. Whatever that slippery slope is, I call it quitting. Okay. Then you interdict it with a power statement. Stop. No, I'm not doing that. So you stop it right away. You stop that fear loop right in its tracks and you interdict it. No, I'm not quitting. I'm not going down that path. I'm not going to hit my wife. I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to whatever. Right.
Yeah.
And then you redirect it. Right. You can do that. I like to use mantras, I got this, you got this, easy day. I'm looking good. I'm feeling good. I ought to be in the Hollywood. Go, Tom, go. Go, Tom, go. How many times I use that while I'm crying on the side of the road? And then, so I redirect that back into positivity. And then I maintain that positive mindset. And when it happens again, I just rinse and repeat.
When did this sentinel first emerge in your mind?
When I was running across the country in 100 and whatever degree heat, the only agreement I had with myself was if I could put one foot in front of the other, I wouldn't stop running. Mm-hmm. So I'm on the side of the road. I'm crying my eyes out. I'm like, this sucks. My toenails have fallen off more than once. I have blisters all over my feet. I can't walk, blah, 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 cry. And then a sentinel just appeared and said, you can keep going. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. And I was crying and I get up.
So it's literally as simple as like, I'm not dead. I'm not paralyzed. Therefore.
And I'm not lying to myself. I'm not lying.
Ooh, that's probably bigger than the other two.
Yeah, I'm not lying to myself. At the end of the day, I'm out in the middle of the desert by myself with my pace car 5 miles ahead of me, waiting for me because it couldn't go right next to me because you can't impede traffic. So I'm sitting there all by myself and I'm like, oh crap, I actually can. I'm just trying to talk myself out of it. I'm literally sitting here crying my eyes out, trying to convince myself that I can't do it when I know deep down inside I can't. Here's where I think it relates to the listeners, because when I was running across North America the first time, and they would just ask me in interviews, why are you doing this? I'm like, because I'm trying to inspire you to do your marathon today. What's your marathon today? Is it getting out of bed? Is it not having that drink today? Is it not having an abusive relationship with your wife today? Is it going to school today? What's your marathon today? What is it? That's what makes it relative to anybody, right? Yeah. Because my marathon and Sally in Wisconsin's marathon, they're two different things, but they're relative. That's the thing. And that's the same thing with trauma, right? Trauma's relative. Over 90, the statistics say that 90% of people have gone through significant trauma in life. Guess what? I'd like to meet the 10% that haven't. Right. So it applies to everybody because it's relative. Trauma's a relative thing and everybody deals with it. Welcome to Earth, right? Place of trauma, and when you take that adversity and you flip it over and you look at the opportunity, you're like, okay, welcome to Earth, place of trauma. Why? Because without trauma, there's no growth, right? Without obstacles, there's no hurdling. Without, dark, there's no light. Without hate, there's no love. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is the nature of the place that we're thrust into. So how do we take that and we flip it and we use it as fuel and we turn that into a flamethrower and have a great life? Because I believe that's what we're meant to do, right? I believe that's what we're meant to do. We just have to find our path to do that.
I was invited to give a speech to a bunch of bankers, 500, Wall Street guys. But the night before, I was invited to this small intimate dinner at a big Manhattan penthouse. There's only 8 guys there. And it was, some of the top hedge fund managers in the world, top, bank CEOs, billionaire guys, very successful, but all in their kind of like mid 60s to late 70s, kind of an older crowd. And it's an interesting moment for me, having this conversation with these guys. They're all asking about my adventures. Did you see any dead bodies when you were climbing Everest? What was it like to be alone in Antarctica for 54 days? Really engaged in that. And Everest had been my childhood dream. It's what I dreamed about since I was a little kid. I never knew how I was going to get there, but I was always like, just in my imagination, like, oh, wow, wouldn't that be cool one day? And it took me to be able, till I was 31 years old, to reach that summit. And fortunately, I've climbed it twice now. But anyways, a question that I love asking people, it's a question I ask elementary school students with my nonprofit work. It's a question I ask people in my public speeches and my books and things like that. I said to these guys, I was like, so I wanted to climb Everest when I was a kid, but what's your guys' Everest? What was your Everest? And I expected these guys, these, super, quote unquote, financially successful guys to be like, oh, well, my Everest was to do this and make all this money. And like, look who I am, whatever, kind of with that bravado and gravitas that I expected. But instead the room falls silent. Like the room just falls silent. And I'm like, it's like when you say some awkward thing and you're like, oh, what? I just got awkward all of a sudden.
Right.
Crickets, And so the dinner table conversation kind of rambles on, someone breaks the silence and we move on from it, but no one ever kind of broaches that subject again. I was like, oh, I did that. That was weird. I'm getting ready to go and take the elevator down. And a guy from the dinner pulls up beside me, and it's probably the oldest guy in the room, 80 years old or something like that, late 70s, grabs me by the shoulder. And he's like, hey, Colin, can I talk to you for a second before you leave? And I said, yeah, sure. What's going on? And he starts getting emotional. And he says, hey, I'm sorry about my friends back there. You asked us a very reasonable and relevant question. And he goes, and he kind of offers some regret. And he goes, I've made more money than you could ever dream possible. But there's not a day that I don't go back in my life to that pond in summer camp when I was 12 years old on a rowboat, and the simplicity and the stillness of that. And then he goes, I wonder what would have happened in my life had I had the gumption to ask myself that question, what my Everest is, not what somebody else's Everest is, not what the societal norms are, but what my Everest actually was. And he just left it there. Basically, offering a significant amount of regret. And I opened my new book, The 12-Hour Walk, with that story, because I think that question is so potent and so powerful. And I think I know all the entrepreneurs listening to this can probably agree, people that have the creativity and the gumption to create something new, something different, something that's never been created before, or at least asking that question. And it's a question that I think it's important to ask throughout life. But to your point, there's no right answer to that question. It can be making millions of dollars. That could be the answer for you. It could be saving millions of lives. It could be starting that business. It could be leaning into your relationships with your family, your friends, your colleague. It doesn't matter what the answer is, but it's actually, you got to ask yourself that question and be true to yourself in the answer. So when I ask that question to people, some people say, I have the answer, but I'm not doing it. And then that gets into a conversation about how to sort of reorient and make some shifts or pivots in one's life. But there is a big group of people that ask, they're like, well, what if I don't know what my Everest is? That question. And to your point, they're doing something with their time, right? Which means they got on some train track or some track that was supposed to be the thing they should do. And then literally got so busy doing it that they're not even aware of the fact they're not doing their thing. They're like, but I don't even know what my thing is. Right. And so the 12-Hour Walk, the book itself, it's about mindset. It's about limiting beliefs. It's about overcoming those fears. And ultimately it's a call to action that invites people to take a 12-hour walk, turn off your phone, put it on airplane mode, go for a walk by yourself in the stillness and silence, and take a day to integrate that. And there's more to that methodology we can talk about if you want, but I bring it into this point of the conversation, which is to say, I tell people, if they don't think they know what their Everest is, then use this time to check in with yourself. Use this day of silence and stillness in your own brain to just ask yourself this question. If I don't know what my Everest is, my intention for taking this walk is to discover that. And it's amazing how few people ever take a day or even an hour, or even 30 minutes to actually sit and intentionally think about them. We've got these, and I'm guilty of this too, cell phones in our pockets, buzzing, to-do list, got to take the kids here, got to take this email, this Zoom call, whatever. And we can be busy, man. You could take your first job when you're 22 years old and be busy until you're 65 years old and wake up and be like, wait, what happened? Like, you did a bunch of stuff, but were you intentional about your time and your actual purpose in that period of time? And it's amazing how just taking one day to have a reflection or an inflection point, how powerful that can be, which is why I'm so excited about spreading this mission around the 12-hour walk.
So what's your Everest now?
I have a concept that I really strongly believe in. It's a core concept of my new book, The 12-Hour Walk, called a possible mindset. And I define that as an empowered way of thinking that unlocks life of limitless possibilities, just daring to dream greatly. It's the mindset that I had in that hospital room in Thailand when the doctor said you may never walk normally again. And you mentioned in the interview, it was like, I'm going to walk normally again, but I'm also going to race a triathlon. I'm also going to, continue to set big goals. And obviously there was a lot of iteration, but even just the belief in that hospital room that I could do something beyond what I was being told, right? These limitless possibilities. You ask these students these questions, and it's fun. You ask 8, 9, 10-year-olds this question, and 500 students in a gymnasium at an assembly in elementary school or something like that, 500 hands go up in the air, man. It's amazing. You ask kids this question and they all have an answer. And their answers are dreams, big dreams, dreams without limits. And of course, we've heard the cliche, I want to be an astronaut, or, I've heard thousands of answers, to this question. I want to be the heartfelt ones. I want to be the first person in my family to graduate from college, things like that. And two things happened for me during that period of time. One is, although I was asking people this question and I had just climbed Mount Everest, my childhood dream, I realized I was 31 years old at the time. Like I've got many more mountains to climb, both literally and figuratively. And so I wasn't just going to kick my feet up and do nothing for the rest of my life. I actually had to say to myself, well, what is my next Everest? And we'll talk about it, I'm sure. But that is when I formulated the idea for becoming the first person to cross Antarctica solo. So that was my next Everest. But I continue to ask myself that question on the backside of each one of these expeditions. And honestly, right now I've got some other expeditions. I haven't announced them that I'm cooking up in my mind, but I'm also really passionate about this 12-hour walk idea. I write the last sentence of the book says, my next Everest is actually inspire 10 million people to take the 12-hour walk. And look, it's free. You can just right at your front door. But I believe the impact that we can have on each other, and the more people that can take just one day to themselves to walk in their own stillness and silence, I believe that the ripple effect of positivity of that is vast. But the second thing, and I think you'll appreciate this, the second thing that happened during that time is I wasn't just speaking to elementary school kids, speaking to high school kids, speaking to college kids. And then, as I mentioned before, speaking to, business leaders and adults in professional contexts. Every age group that I went higher. So elementary school kid, 500 kids around. High school kids, I'm lucky if half of them put their hands up. College kids, maybe a third. You start asking, mid-level management at a corporation somewhere, average age 40. I'm lucky if I get 2 hands in the back of the room up where someone's willing to share with me what their Everest is. Again, I sort of reflective of what, the crickets of this room that I described before. And why is that? Why is that? And my thesis, and I've certainly spent a lot of time thinking about this and talking about this, is we're actually born with a possible mindset. This thing that I teach, this empowered way of thinking, this limitless belief in limitless possibilities. We're born with that. But society, unfortunately, and the sort of societal norms and the pressures and the setbacks and the growing fear and anxiety and, the dinging of our phones actually trains that out of us. And so this 12-hour walk, and so much of my own mission inspiring others, is around getting people to tap back in, to say, I'm not actually teaching you about something you don't know about. I'm just reteaching you. I'm refamiliarizing you with something that you were innately came into this planet with, which is there are limitless possibilities in front of us on every step of the way.
So why would the room go silent? And it's got to be one of three things. Either they've forgotten, they've literally lost it, like to your point, such that it's still rediscoverable, or they feel shame, right, that they haven't pursued it, or they're embarrassed to say it in front of their peers.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it's probably a combination of all three, quite honestly. Yeah. And the third one I think is big. There's a whole chapter in the book around the fear of others, or, the fear of criticism, right? The fear of not acceptance. And it's so interesting that we live in a society where we can, even fear, some of our best friends, our family members. Oh, I want to say this goal, but they're going to say. To
be clear, I think we fear them the most.
The most, right? And I know there's a lot of entrepreneurs listening to this. It's like, some people are such dedicated entrepreneurs that they're like, this is my big idea. I'm going for it, whatever. And obviously, if you started the business, you did. But there's probably that moment when you had to tell your mother, your father, your best friend, or someone like that. And almost every good entrepreneur that I know, successful people I know, hundreds of millions of dollars, huge exits, whatever. They're like, I'll tell you what, when I told my best friend or my mom this idea when I was launching it, people were like, that is a stupid idea. Like, that's never going to work. Like sometimes the people closest to us, and I say, I'm a big believer that we are the stories that we tell ourselves. We're the stories we tell ourselves, right? Like we get to choose. You don't let somebody else write that story for you. And if you dare to dream greatly, if you dare to set that seemingly impossible goal, I'll tell you what, I'd barely spend any time in Antarctica, and I announced to the world and my friends and my peers, hey, I'm going to become the first person in history to walk across the entire continent of Antarctica solo, unsupported, and human powered. And people were like, what are you talking about, man? You're crazy. And then people looked into it further and they go, wait a second. People have actually tried this before. Really, really talented polar explorers have tried this before. People have died. People have run out of food. And you're like fairly inexperienced. Like, not only like, is this thing impossible, but if there were somebody to do it, it sure as hell isn't you, Colin. Like, you're a triathlete and you've climbed some mountains, but like, you're not like some hardened, lifelong polar explorer. And had I let them author my story, I would have been like, you're right, guys. You're right. There's no way I'm going to do this. But you have to have that sort of inner strength to push back against it. I mean, the same thing, I won't go on too long of a rant here about this, but passionate about it. It's like when I set my goal for that first expedition, I mentioned the Explorers Grand Slam and I mentioned the outcome. I did it in 139 days. When I dreamed that up, I had no money. I had $10,000 to my name. My wife and I were living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Portland, Oregon. And we quickly did some research on the project and just the logistics, the North Pole, the South Pole, Everest, the whole project was going to cost somewhere around $500,000. And that's the moment, like I'm telling you what, that is the moment where most good ideas die. You're like, hey, I got this big idea for this thing, or I want to launch this new company. It's going to be this, that, and the other thing. And then you wake up and you're like, oh, but I've got no money, no resources, no way to figure this out. Like, or even a more silly example, it's like you're drinking beers with a buddy on the weekend. You're like, yo, we're going to train for the New York City Marathon, and we're going to run this marathon. You wake up with a hangover the next day and you're like, yeah, man, like I'm just bullshitting with you, right? Why? Because our own thoughts degrade our mind. We are sometimes our harshest critics, and that fear of failure, that fear of actually not getting there, that's what leaves us short of unlocking our fullest potential, like you talk about, right? And it's being able to push through that, to reorient that mindset makes all of the difference. And again, I won't give the story, but there's a whole 18 months between when I said I want to do this thing for $500,000 and the thousands of doors that got slammed in my face and the dead ends and the things. But I got up every single day being like, I have no idea how I'm going to solve this thing, but I believe in abundance. I believe in the limitless possibilities that exist. I believe my truest potential is figuring this out. And I did. And here I am. And I love telling the story, sure, of the big expeditions and the big epic moments in those expeditions and things like that. But when I summited Everest for the first time, 2016, I looked down and I 31 years in the dreaming, at 31 years old. I don't know when exactly I first heard about Everest, but it was definitely elementary school age. I was young, read some book or saw some,
right,
in school film or something about, Mount Everest, the tallest mountain in the world. And my imagination was hooked from that point onwards. And I had no idea how I was going to get there. And I get to the summit. It's this beautiful moment, of celebration. You can only be on the summit for 5 minutes, and you got to get down safely. I look down and there's, some ice, some rocks, and there's a couple of pebbles there on the ground. And I reach down, I pick up this pebble and I put it in my pocket, and I've carried it with me for years ever since. And, it's a tiny little rock. You couldn't distinguish it from the, little rock in your driveway or something like that. But what struck me in that moment, and the reason I carry that around me, is exactly what you're talking about, is that Mount Everest, literally the largest mountain in the world. I can tell you from experience, when you stand at the bottom of that mountain, you look up at that, you think to yourself, there is no possible human way anyone could ever climb all the way up there. It's just so massive, right? And that's how our goals and our hopes and our dreams and things often feel, just so insurmountable. But I didn't get up there by doing some Herculean thing once. The rock in my pocket reminds me that even Mount Everest, even the tallest mountain in the world, can be broken down to its smallest parts. It's actually just a bunch of small little rocks stacked on top of each other, thousands, if not millions of steps leading to the summit. And I realized that my journey to get there wasn't just the journey on the mountain, just the steps actually taken on the mountain, but it was the dreaming, it was the preparing, it was that consistency over time, that diligence, the setting the big goal of the Explorers Grand Slam, the working towards, the $500,000, the training my body, whatever. But none of those gains were actually made overnight. Those gains were made by, like you said, getting up, sending one more email, making one more phone call, lifting one more rep of the weight. Those tiny, 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 smallest little rocks stacked on top of each other. That is how you reach the summit of your Everest.
Do you know, and if so, you're as weird as I am for wanting to know, how many calories did you eat in those 139 days?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Will you please go do the math? I just want to know.
The closest answer I could get to you on that is I did a lot more deep dive into my specific nutrition and food around the Antarctica, solo Antarctica crossing. And the reason why is I was trying to do something called unsupported, which is what I did. Which means no resupplies of food or fuel at all along the way, which means whatever you get dropped off with on the edge of Antarctica, that's all you've got. You can't call in resupplies. You can't bring in an extra, 100 pounds of food halfway through or something like that.
Right.
So the reason that expedition had never been completed was for this exact reason. It's not that people couldn't stay out there for, 60 days, 70 days, whatever, in my case, 54 days. It was because if you put 1,000 pounds of food in a sled, you can't move it. But if you put 100 pounds of food in a sled, you can move it, but you're going to run out of food, before you get to the other side. And so I did all this research on optimizing the food and the nutrition, everything in my sled. What came down to and how much I could pull. First and foremost, my sled started out weighing 375 pounds.
And water too. I mean, water.
So you put fuel, white gas in there to melt. You're surrounded by water.
Okay.
So but you have to have fuel, of course. So the fuel is also weight in there. So it's food and fuel. But you're obviously, if you carry that much water, you definitely wouldn't get anywhere because it'd be frozen. It'd be big block ice. I'm
tempted to ask the editors to cut out that question. I just asked about water.
You'd be surprised. So many people ask that question. So many people, they're like, wait, but what about water? They're like, oh, right. Of course. It's literally, that's all you're walking on is water. It's frozen water. But that's what takes a lot of effort. I was drinking 6 liters of water per day because I'm burning so many calories and working so hard, and it's a large desert. So it takes me about 2 or 3 hours to melt 6 liters of water in that temperature, right? So it's a lot of effort and a lot of fuel that you need per weight of that. Anyways, but so I was burning 10,000 calories a day is what we estimated. And I could only put in my sled enough for 7,000 calories per day for 55 days. And I, towards the last 15 days, was running so low on food and supplies that I actually reduced that to 5,000. So basically from day one, I was on a 3,000 calorie deficit. And then on the last, couple of weeks, I was on as much as a 5,000 plus calorie deficit while I was out there, which sounds like you know a lot about food and nutrition. You can quickly do the math. You're losing a pound a day of body weight.
Almost a pound and a half.
Yeah. So I was a bag of bones on the other side. That's for sure.
Yeah. And I assume you're not self-conscious about it. Like what are your stats? How tall, how much do you weigh? What, your lean body mass or body fat? Like now you got me into this.
I'm 6 foot tall. One of the funniest comments that I get from people is I'll go give a speech, whatever, on a stage somewhere. And someone comes up to me afterwards. They're like, hey man, I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but, I read your bio, and they're kind of being all shy, and they're like, you're just like a really normal looking guy. Right. Like, they're like, I read your bio, I figured like 6'6", like huge jack, like, dude, like I'm like a pretty like normal size guy. I mean, 6 foot tall. I mean, I'm not, that's not super tall, not super short, 6 foot tall. When I was racing triathlon professionally, I raced as light as like 155, 150. My walking around weight right now is about 170. When I started my Antarctica crossing, obviously I knew I was going to lose a ton of weight. So I actually intentionally, gain lean muscle mass, but ultimately the last month or two, I actually tried to properly put on fat. In my memoir, The Impossible First, there's some pictures of that. I got up to like high 180s, 185, 188, something like that. And then when I finished, I didn't get a scale on me like right away before I ate a bunch of food when I got back to the base in Antarctica, but I estimated that I lost, anywhere between 30 to 40, 50 pounds. I was skinny. Like my wife didn't recognize me.
So you were like potentially like 140.
Yeah. Something. Yeah. I would always estimate somewhere in like the high 140s probably. I was just like, here's something I never know could happen. This is how I know I lost a lot of weight. And I had a wristwatch on the entire time, obviously, never took it off. And one day maybe day 40 or something like that. I know my ribs are sticking out. My hip bones are sticking out. It's getting uncomfortable to sleep. I'm having to actually sew and stitch my pants because I'm getting so skinny that my pants are starting to fall off of me, making them tighter and tighter. And then I raised my left hand, which has my wristwatch on it at one point, and my wristwatch slides back towards my elbow. And I think to myself, I'm like, oh, weird. I must have somehow loosened the strap like in the night. And I look down, and sure enough, I haven't loosened the strap at all. It's that I'm actually losing so much weight that now my body is it's actually eating the excess fat in my wrist. It's not a place that it's like my body is in such starvation mode that like, I mean, you never think I could lose my, forearm a little bit.
Yeah. Wow.
And so that's the level of intense starvation my body was going through that expedition.
If you loved that episode, then you're definitely going to love this one. Check it out.
Your wife comes home this evening. She goes, Jeff, why do you love me? You're not going to be wondering why you love her. You're going to be wondering what the hell happened that she's coming home asking that question. You can be uncomfortable and you can be safe. Are we present to each other in the discomfort of the questions, not necessarily in how we're responding with the answers? That to me is intimacy.